Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a mind-bending geopolitical paradox. We're going to unpack a scenario where the entire modern world is basically balancing on a geographical razor's edge. And the wild part? Most of us don't even realize it's happening until the moment it breaks. Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine a war game scenario set just a little bit in the future. February 28, 2026. A massive escalation kicks off in the Middle East. The US and Israel launch nearly 900 strikes on Iran in just 12 hours. We're talking military bases, missile sites, nuclear facilities, the whole shebang. It's envisioned as one of the most devastating opening salvos in modern history. But here's the twist. The response from the other side doesn't come in the form of conventional missiles. Instead, it's a move that literally paralyzes the globe. Within weeks, oil surges way past $126 a barrel. Iraq has to shut down its oil fields simply because they have nowhere to put the crude. Qatar declares force majeure, literally telling the world, hey, we can't fulfill our contracts because the landscape has completely shifted. Pakistan is literally forced to close schools just to save electricity. The International Energy Agency panics and releases the largest emergency oil reserve in its history. And you know what? That massive, unprecedented release buys the world exactly 4 days. Tankers filled with billions of dollars worth of oil just sit there, completely frozen.
And the cause of this total, catastrophic global shutdown? A tiny, physical gap of water that measures just 21 miles wide.
Section 1. The 21-mile bottleneck. Let's take a look at the actual geography of this crucial choke point to understand why it holds so much power. The Strait of Hormuz sits right between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. At its absolute narrowest point, it's only 21 miles across. To put that into perspective for you, that's roughly the distance from central London to Heathrow Airport. It's tiny. Yet through that fragile little gap, roughly 20 million barrels of oil flow every single day. That's a fifth of everything the entire world consumes. Saudi Arabia's oil, Iraq's, Kuwait's, Qatar's liquefied natural gas, the very fuel that heats European homes through the winter and powers these massive Asian manufacturing hubs. All of it funnels right through this single corridor before hitting the open ocean. The Gulf is, in essence, a dead end. This is the sole exit.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer, staggering scale of dependence that global economic powerhouses have on this one exit. Look at this. China receives roughly a third of its oil directly through this passage. In Japan, a staggering 70% of its total oil supply comes from the Gulf, almost all of it squeezed right through Hormuz. It's the exact same terrifying math for South Korea, Taiwan, and India. They are utterly mathematically reliant on this one waterway staying open.
And this brilliantly illustrates that the Strait of Hormuz is absolutely not just an oil story. It's a civilization story. Flowing through this exact same gap is a third of the world's entire fertilizer trade. Think about what that means for a second. Fertilizer feeds crops and crops feed people. When this passage closes, global fertilizer prices spike, which means food prices immediately follow in countries that are nowhere near the Middle East. It also carries helium for hospitals, aluminum for global manufacturing, and the raw materials for plastics and petrochemicals that show up in, well, almost every consumer product on Earth. A farmer in Bangladesh, a factory worker in Vietnam, a commuter in Munich. They might have never seen this water, but their daily lives depend entirely on it flowing perfectly. Section 2. A 500-year hostage situation. Let's move along and see how this builds, because this incredible vulnerability didn't just happen by accident. Looking at the deep historical precedent of this trap, we see a really clear pattern, and trust me, every government on Earth knows this history. Back in 1507, a Portuguese explorer named Alfonso de Albuquerque realized a sort of glitch in the world map. He realized he didn't need to conquer an entire region to own its incredible wealth. He just sailed straight to the island of Hormuz and seized it. The logic was breathtakingly simple. Control the door, and you control the trade. Over the centuries, the empires and the flags changed, but that underlying logic never did. The British East India Company eventually pushed the Portuguese out. Fast forward to the 1980s. During the Iran-Iraq War, both sides actively attacked oil tankers directly in the Gulf, desperately trying to cut off each other's income in the grinding tanker war. It's the exact same logic. If you own the door, the rest of the world has to ask you for permission to walk through it. Which brings us to the core paradox of this entire situation. The simple truth is, you don't need massive military conquest to hold the world's economy hostage. You don't actually need to win a war. You just need to close the right door. If you hold the right geographical choke point, you can freeze the entire global supply chain dead in its tracks. Section 3. The military illusion.
Now, you might naturally assume that the world's most powerful navies have this vital choke point completely secured, right? Well, looking at the stark contrast in military dynamics reveals an entirely different reality. On one hand, you've got the United States Fifth Fleet, based just 30 minutes away in Bahrain. We're talking multi-billion-dollar aircraft carriers, advanced destroyers, nuclear submarines. By any measure, it's one of the most powerful forces ever assembled, parked right there for this exact reason. But here's the catch. The Strait of Hormuz is not built for a conventional navy to dominate. Against that massive fleet, you have Iran's highly asymmetric toolkit, swarms of fast attack boats that just blur into radar clutter, and hundreds of incredibly cheap plastic mines designed specifically to evade advanced sonar. Securing a shipping lane against these tactics takes weeks, but recontaminating it with cheap mines, that takes hours. It is, for all intents and purposes, a knife fight in a dark room. This perfectly captures why conventional military dominance really struggles here. Geographically, Iran doesn't just border the strait. They control strategic islands situated directly inside the main shipping lanes. They sit right in the middle of the world's most important route, positioned to monitor and challenge everything that moves. For 40 years, they've lived right there in the doorframe. They know exactly where the hinges are.
Section 4, the invisible lock.
This brings us to the absolute most fascinating twist in this explainer. The actual reason this strait closes during a crisis isn't even military. Let's break down this cascading failure. Because even if the U.S. Navy cleared every single inch of that water, the tankers still wouldn't move. We call it the insurance death spiral. The absolute second a conflict begins in the Gulf, marine underwriters review their massive financial exposure. If there's an incident, they raise premiums. If a single ship goes down, coverage is pulled entirely. And without insurance, no commercial captain on Earth is going to sail their vessel into that water. And it's not because they're cowards. It's because the multi-million-dollar ship isn't insured, the billion-dollar cargo isn't insured, and the crew isn't insured. Commercial shipping just stops. The U.S. Navy can offer to heavily escort every single tanker through the lane, but a military literally cannot force a commercial insurance firm to write a policy on a vulnerable vessel sailing directly into an active war zone. So the crucial point is this. The market doesn't wait to see a ship sink. It panics at the very first shot. Heck, it panics at the mere rumor of mines in the water. The physical key to this waterway might technically be naval vessels, but the actual, functional lock is held by insurance underwriters sitting in gray office buildings in London. That is truly incredible leverage. Section 5, the geopolitical trap. To bring this all together, we really have to ask, why does the modern, advanced world simply accept this massive, looming vulnerability day after day? Notice the sheer disconnect between the players involved here. On one side, you have the nations holding geographic leverage, Iran and Oman. They physically control the water. Though it's worth noting, leverage works both ways. They also desperately rely on that same water for their own vital oil revenue. Then you've got the nations bearing almost the entire economic risk. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. They have absolutely zero territory in this fight, zero position in the conflict. Yet their economies are running on a ticking clock as they watch emergency global reserves drain in a matter of days. Finally, you have the military power, the United States, sitting 30 minutes away with engines running, but fundamentally unable to fix the core commercial problem of getting civilian ships to confidently sail. When the trap springs, nobody has a move. Of course, eventually, the crisis always passes. The hard reality of mutual economic dependence kicks in, the door reopens, and the tankers start moving again. And almost immediately, all the hard questions about how exposed the world is get quietly set aside. Why? Well, because while overland pipelines that bypass the strait do exist, they handle only a tiny fraction of the total volume. Upgrading them or fixing the bypass would cost tens of billions of dollars. And honestly, it solves a problem that, when the strait is safely open, doesn't seem to exist. The oil flow's cheap, the shipping is incredibly reliable, and trying to convince a government to spend tens of billions of dollars on an alternative route for a crisis that might not happen for another decade, it's practically impossible. So, the world just chooses willful ignorance. The countries that truly depend on this water the most have no territory there and no practical way to change the geography. The Strait of Hormuz has been fiercely contested for over 500 years. Someone tries to control the door, someone else tries to force it open, and the rest of the world is trapped right in the middle, just watching and hoping the tankers eventually move again. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. It's an absolutely fascinating look at the fragility of our global supply chain. I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. The modern world is fundamentally built on a 500-year-old hostage situation. So when that 21-mile door inevitably closes again, who will ultimately pay the price?